This is normally the part of the program where I ask you how you're doing, but I know how you're doing today. The day before game day for the Georgia Bulldogs, and around here, we could not be more excited. Hey, everybody, I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. We're going to do a lot today to get ready for tomorrow in Nashville. In fact, as soon as we are done with DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger today, we are on the road, heading up there. I know many of you will be watching or listening as you're on your way there as well. Just remember, hands on the steering wheel, 10 and 2. Make sure y'all stay safe going up to Tennessee for this one. Going to be a ton of fun. Jeff Sintel later on. I will begin the show with some hopeful evidence, or at least I hope I can present the evidence in a convincing fashion of why I believe Georgia wins the national championship this season. And we'll talk about what makes the college football season really special, what makes it really fun, and why this year will be no different in that regard, no matter how the season ultimately ends for the Dogs. It's all coming up. We're really glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is presented by Kroger. More ways to save fresh food, low prices at Kroger.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
19 reasons Georgia will win the national championship in 2019. Now, I promise you, I'm not going to make this too tedious. This isn't going to be like reading some sort of like academic textbook or anything like that. But the reason why we begin the show this way on this particular day is because, you know, there's been some talk behind the scenes here around DawgNation Daily for the last couple of weeks of, you know, would we make any kind of official predictions? You know, would I make any kind of official predictions? For the most part, you don't really care. You just want to watch the games. But it seems like the appropriate thing to do before a season begins. However, admittedly, I will say that there is a little bit of a problem with me making the official prediction. I told this to our buddy Connor Riley, who's one of our producers here for DawgNation Daily. I said, you know, if I go on the air and say I believe that Georgia will win the national championship, I'm not even sure anyone's going to believe me because the name of the show is DawgNation Daily. I wear the Georgia gear every single day. You know, I like to do the show from the perspective of a fan. I like to talk with fans as opposed to talking down to fans. That's kind of always been my choice, always been the way in which I've chosen to go about this program. But the byproduct that is, well, if someone were to hear me say Georgia wins the national championship, there would be a measure of, well, isn't that what you're supposed to say? Aren't you, of all people, supposed to think Georgia wins the national championship here in 2019? And that's probably a fair question to ask. Admittedly, my track record on some of this kind of stuff has not always been perfect. On the very first episode of DawgNation Daily, now more than 1,000 episodes ago, I did pick Georgia to make the playoff in 2015, and as time has passed, that prediction looks worse and worse and worse. So, admittedly, my track record isn't perfect on this kind of stuff. And if I say Georgia wins the national championship, some people assume that's just kind of what I'm supposed to say. And every year's essentially the same way when it comes to that kind of stuff. I sort of get all of that. That's really the theme that I tried to go down with our Own the East series. The videos that I recorded with our buddy John Stinchcomb, the great former Georgia All-American, the written pieces that I've accompanied those with at the world-famous DawgNation.com. There are 19 Own the East articles in total in that series. And in my mind, the fuel that drove that series this year were, in some form or fashion, and these are the 19 reasons why I think that Georgia can win the national championship and likely will win the national championship. And today, that likely becomes at least to the extent that it's possible to conjure this up, a definite my pick of Georgia win the national champion. So I won't run through all 19 of these, but if you read the Own the East articles that are chronicled there at DawgNation.com, you can see these. Instead, let me put each of the 19 things in categories, because when I look at all 19 of these things there for Georgia, ultimately you kind of have three different categories that emerge. Two things kind of involving Georgia, and then one series of things kind of outside of Georgia. So let me start with the reasons Georgia wins the national championship that kind of come from within the program and have to do with Georgia itself. And there are really, I believe, two twin pillars that kind of hold up the Georgia national championship bid for 2019. On one side, you have breakout stars, and on the other side, you have foundational veterans. Breakout stars, foundational veterans, those are the twin pillars that hold up Georgia this season, and it's within those two silos that I believe the national championship bid for Georgia comes. Now, I've said this a lot. Let me repeat this one more time. If you could only look at one of these two things, breakout stars, foundational veterans, there's a tendency to fixate on the breakout stars because new is exciting. Exciting sometimes can be thought to be better. There's a tendency to want to fixate on the breakout stars. However, I do believe that the foundational veterans is truly the most important aspect of this. Between the newcomers who may do some big things, or the guys in a more expanded role this year doing some big things, and the guys who've been good for a while just doing more of what we've come to expect from them, I do truly believe it's the foundational veterans that'll ultimately be the fuel and the catalyst that leads Georgia to the national championship. But them alone is not going to be enough. You got to have some of those breakout stars there as well. And this week, Kirby Smart kind of alluded to that. That obviously one of the things that he's interested in is much the same way many of us. When we are either in Nashville on Saturday or watching on TV, wherever you happen to be on Saturday night, some of these guys we haven't seen before, or some of these guys being asked to do more this year than we've seen them do in the past, that is one of the major curiosities for this game, and that's true for Kirby Smart as well.
Nobody in the country knows what they got till they go out there and play, and so many kids that haven't had to respond to the lights that, it's going to be really fun to see some of these kids grow up and play.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun, and you're talking about guys like Nolan Smith, N'Kobe Dean on defense, probably Jermaine Johnson there too, Lewis Seen getting involved in some of that defensive stuff as well. But I think it's also important to note when I say, quote, breakout stars, I'm not only just talking about freshmen. I'm talking about a guy like, Zamir White as a redshirt freshman. We'll see him for the first time tomorrow, but that's also potentially that kind of breakout star situation. It's also guys who've been in the program for a long time and finally get their real shot. It's a guy like Brian Harrigan, maybe, for instance, on that. And it's also the potential that a breakout star kind of comes from a group that we're maybe a little suspicious of, or maybe suspicious is too strong of a word, maybe a little curious about, or maybe taking a bit of a wait-and-see approach, like, say, the wide receiver core, for instance. I thought it was really interesting. There's a analytics website that doesn't solely cover sports. It's 538.com. They cover politics and lots of different things like that. But they were writing about Georgia the other day. One of the things they were writing about was how that, yes, losing talent from a previous year's team has a detrimental effect typically on the college football team the following year. However, the one mitigating factor they pointed out was the presence of a returning starter at quarterback, that you can lose multiple starters off a offense from the year before and still be okay the next year as long as you kind of lean on the experience of your quarterback. I don't certainly know the math they used to determine that, but it was an interesting piece nonetheless. I may put a link to that at the world-famous DawgNation.com when I post the show a little bit later on. The point and the reason why I bring that up is because that means I think the chance of a breakout star emerging at the wide receiver position is probably made greater because of the presence of Fromm. Even though sometimes you may wonder, what can a freshman receiver do? And my gosh, look how much Georgia lost off that group a year ago. Can a Pickens, can a Blaylock really do it? Can a Demetrius Robertson, who we didn't see a lot last year, can this be his year this year? I think the answer to that question is probably yes, because of the talent that those guys possess and because of the experience of the guy who's delivering them the football. And speaking of the experience, as we said before, the other big pillar for Georgia are those foundational veterans, guys like Fromm, who now have been through all of this before and been through the ringer here and now find themselves ready to lead one final time, and maybe this time leading Georgia to a place that it has not been before. And you'll remember the storyline in the month of August. Remember that first scrimmage at the very beginning of the month where those guys, I'm guessing here, but the Andrew Thomases and the Jake Fromms and maybe even some of the guys on defense who we think of as the most important central figures among the starting core. Maybe they didn't have quite such a good day that first scrimmage. They were criticized, called out by Kirby Smart. And remember that second scrimmage, how that went? Apparently way better for the names most fans know best of all. Here's Kirby Smart once again as a reminder.
Thought we had a much more spirited scrimmage. It was still hot out there, probably not as humid as it was last time. We didn't have the rain delay this time, but they started out a lot better, started out a lot faster, a lot more competitive. Thought both ones units played better, which meant the twos probably didn't play as well, but there were some explosive plays in the scrimmage, and I was proud of the competitive toughness.
I love that phrase there at the end, competitive toughness, and that's the reason why I play that clip. Smart challenged them early in the month of August, and those guys, the Fromms and the Swifts and the Thomases and the J.R. Reeds and the rest of that group, they responded to that challenge in the second scrimmage. Georgia will be challenged on the field in real games this year, too, and the most likely names to respond to that scrimmage are the names I just mentioned, the foundational veterans on this team. And then you get to the sort of the third category of reasons why Georgia wins the national championship in 2019. This is the part that kind of comes outside the program. Take a look at the schedule for a moment. Who won this schedule in the regular season is likely to be Georgia. And listen, if you're not a Georgia fan, you're watching or listening right now, you can have your doubts, you can have your skepticism, that's fine. But look at this as objectively as we all possibly can. Georgia will be a touchdown or so favorite at Auburn. It'll be around that, maybe a little less in Jacksonville against Florida, but these are by no means the kind of grizzly bear opponents that strike fear in the heart of a Georgia fan. I don't know that in the time that we've been doing this show or in the time that many of us have been watching Georgia football, the talent Georgia has compared to the schedule that it plays, even though according to ESPN's FBI data, this is the number 5 schedule in the country. I don't know that it's ever set up for Georgia quite the way that it looks to set up right now. And then you obviously get to what happens after that, the Alabamas and the Clemsons. Can I guarantee you that Georgia beats Alabama in December if those two teams were to play? And can I guarantee you that Georgia will knock off a Clemson once it gets there beyond that? Obviously I can't. We know the reasons it might not. I mentioned the wide receiver core. There's the issue with the stopping of the run. Georgia didn't do that well a year ago. The need to produce more havoc. We've now talked about those things a lot. Those are imperfections in the current makeup of Georgia. But here's the point I want to leave you with, and we'll all find out for ourselves over the course of the next few months how true this ends up being. Georgia is clearly an imperfect team, but so is everybody else. We notice the imperfections of Georgia because we watch it the most closely. You don't have to be a perfect team to have a perfect season. Georgia is an imperfect team, but this year, I believe it may be the one we've all been waiting for. An imperfect team that has a perfect season, and my, won't that ride be a fun one to go down. Can't wait to start it with you tonight in Nashville and then throughout the weekend there as Georgia gets ready to take on Vanderbilt. Hey, everybody, my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger, and we're glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio noon, of course, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available as a podcast wherever you find them, including, as I said before, the world-famous DawgNation.com. Jeff Sintel coming up in a couple of minutes, his thoughts on the start of the upcoming season. Before we get to that, though, let me thank our friends at Kroger for making all of this possible. And, of course, as I've been saying now for a while, as you head towards Nashville, for those of you who are going, for those of you staying home, don't forget Kroger, a great spot to get fueled up for all your big Labor Day parties. You can make Labor Day Flavor Day. Great savings. Half boneless New York strip loin. That's just $5.99 a pound when you use your card. How about Coke products? And don't forget the desserts as well. Drumsticks, things like that. All big savings there at Kroger as you get ready for a really fun Labor Day weekend. Hope you're getting ready to enjoy yourself no matter what you are doing here this weekend. All right, DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Before we get Jeff Sintel, let me also go around the doghouse today, brought to you by our friends at Merriweather and Tharp. And I want to go back in time just briefly to discuss something we've discussed this week, and then I want to kind of bring that to the present tense by looking at something that happened last night that I do think is pretty instructive here for Georgia fans in terms of how they should view this upcoming season. One of the interesting situations facing Georgia is how the production at running back is going to be divvied up, how that's going to be handled. Now, I think that no matter what the pecking order ends up being, the Georgia running back situation is going to probably be pretty strong. I just think the group is deep enough that no matter what the pecking order looks like, the hierarchy looks like, things should probably be fine. However, there is at least a little bit of curiosity as we get towards the start of the season about the possibility that maybe DeAndre Swift might not be used as much as some fans would want or maybe some fans would expect. I mean, in fact, there's even been some, I guess, curiosity about whether or not that Swift might be a little banged up, maybe not fully 100% thus far during practices. And is this lingering situation seemingly similar to last year, although maybe not the same injury type situation? Is this something that Swift is just going to deal with while at Georgia? Well, Smart talked about that there this week. Let me give you another taste of that as a reminder.
I can't speak to high school, so I don't know that, but I can speak to the time here. He's been in the backfield with some good players. I mean, we obviously know his freshman year, and we know last year with the guys that we had in the backfield with him, really 2-3 guys that you know, there may not be an opportunity for one guy to get 25, 30 carries. It's just the game is not built like it used to be for guys to carry that. The people hitting these guys are bigger, faster, stronger. There's a lot more licks. Just it may not happen that way. But if I know that should it be that way, that he has to carry the ball 25 times a game to win, I have no doubt that DeAndre Swift could do that. But it all goes back to, is that necessary? And you do what you have to do to win. And sometimes other guys have good skill sets. Sometimes other guys are fresher. Sometimes it's a rotation pattern. And some of our games haven't dictated where a guy could get that many carries, because some of our games have been lopsided and you don't get a chance to get guys that many carries.
So Smart won't commit there to giving a lot of carries to DeAndre Swift, and last year that was kind of the story for him. Big production in limited carries. A lot of Georgia fans would like to see Swift as part of the Heisman conversation. Can you do that if you're not getting, as Smart just talked about, 25 carries a game or something along those lines? Well, I wanted to bring another running back into this discussion because I do think it could be instructive for how we view DeAndre Swift this year. Did you see Travis Etienne last night for Clemson? Now I realize that Georgia Tech is the kind of team that, pretty much every team Georgia plays this entire season will be better than Tech until it plays Georgia Tech at the end of the year. I realize this is no sterling opponent, but Etienne last night in 12 carries goes for 205 yards. That's a 17.1 yard average. Scored 3 times and used a 90-yard run to kind of help fuel that along there. So here's a guy that absolutely made a Heisman-type statement last night, despite the fact that he only toted the rock about 12 times. Now, I don't know that DeAndre Swift's going to be able to do those kinds of things against Vanderbilt or anybody else this year, but I think it does go to show you that you can be extremely valuable in a limited number of touches, and it's probably better for Swift, better for the Georgia running game overall, if he's used much the same way Etienne was used last night in a blowout. But Swift is the kind of guy, explosive as he is, that can make the most of maybe even a limited number of opportunities. So watch the way Clemson uses Etienne, both last night and the rest of the season, as maybe a potential blueprint for how Georgia will use DeAndre Swift as well. It's Around the Doghouse. It's brought to you by my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. And for many of you, you may be going through a tough time right now, a divorce situation. It was never what you thought it would be. You never thought you'd be going through this, but it is in the picture now. You've got questions that need answers, and that means you want an expert on your side to help answer those questions. Well, listen, Merriweather and Tharp has been doing this kind of thing for a long time. They've been through this thousands of times with thousands of clients. They'll even offer you a free initial telephone consultation as well. You can speak to one of their attorneys. The concerns you have, they'll help you find the answer for those. It's my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. It's your source for Georgia divorce. You can find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. Once again, theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, we've got a lot more fun stuff to come here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. But, of course, Friday, the staple, that's Jeff Sintel. Let's talk to him right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Jeff Sintel on a Friday. Wouldn't be DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger without that. And it's fun to have Jeff as a part of our program here today. And, Jeff, I have to say, we have to start our conversation with a very serious subject, if you do not mind. Are you up for a little taking your medicine here, maybe a little criticism coming from the DawgNation Forum? Are you okay with that?
Hey, man, I'm always good with it, Brennan. It's Friday. We got games on Saturday. We're living and breathing again, brother.
Yeah, we are definitely doing that. So I was looking at the forum here this morning, and I was noticing that a couple of people were remarking in a very similar tone to what I remarked on, that maybe you're not fully on board with DawgNation Libation, which is scheduled to come up tonight in downtown Nashville as we head towards the start of the season tomorrow, that you seem to be only going about 3/4 speed on this, that you're not maybe fully bought in to kind of doing kind of an unofficial, unsanctioned, sort of like a DawgNation off-the-clock type thing where we're not, no microphones, no speakers, nothing along those lines. I'm excited about it. I think Connor Riley's excited about it. I can't quite figure out if Jeff Sintel's excited about it, and I was happy to know that DawgNation Forum users at forum.dawgnation.com are kind of backing me up on that. What say you?
Brandon, I think this is an example where you try to control the narrative. I'm going to say this. Some of us, brother, we have to focus on the work during the week. We're not thinking about pub crawls. And this will be a pro wrestling conversation here because that's your arena, man. But if you want to go places to crawl and hang out in Nashville, brother, I can go 6 deep. You want to go to? I'm not going to go with the standby Tootsies. I'm going to think about Acme Feed and Seed. What about What about Pub 5? What about on top of the George Jones Museum, sir. The George Rooftop Bar, man. You got to do some George Jones nighttime, evening libations while you're in Nash Vegas, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me tell you how I think this is going to play out. Jeff, you're like me. You're kind of a child of the 90s. You remember those like 1992 Olympics basketball team practices? These weren't sanctioned games, but they may have been the greatest games that have ever been played in the history of the sport. That's kind of what I think DawgNation Libation is going to be. In fact, that's what some are already calling it. The greatest unsanctioned DawgNation event ever. Now, coming up this season, we've got a lot of really, really fun, officially sanctioned events. In fact, next week, I may make one of the biggest announcements we've made to kick off a season in quite some time. So we've got some incredible sanction events coming up. We've even got a sanctioned DawgNation Invasion a little later on this year as well. But in terms of unsanctioned events, this may be a little bit like those 92 Dream Team practices. You know, you had to be there to experience it. You know, there are no referees. It's not on TV. It's not a sanctioned game. But, man, nobody ever got after it harder. That's what DawgNation Libation may end up being.
Man, somehow when you say sanction all the time, that makes me wonder if it's sanction for the Intercontinental title or the World Wrestling Federation. Is this a sanctioned match by the NWO? I mean, I think people would love to see Brandon in a do-rag with some aviator glasses and a leather jacket or something like that walking up and down Broadway this weekend.
All right, let me do one more housekeeping note with you, and then I want to get serious on some very important topics, including what else is new, 5-star running back Zachary Evans. What is the best way to tell people about DawgNation Libation? Because like I said, you know, this is kind of an unofficial event, so it's going to be kind of loosey-goosey. Is it on Twitter? Is it the DawgNation Instagram feed? What's the best? I mean, I think of Instagram kind of because, you know, Nashville's kind of a hipster town, you know, so you want to go to a little bit more on the hipster vibe with the social media. What is the best way to keep people abreast of how it's going down with a DawgNation Libation?
Well, Brandon, I think it's personally the easiest thing we can do is share your personal cell phone number on the air so they can keep up with you.
Listen, having my cell phone number, as almost anyone who works with me could attest, it will be the least satisfying experience of your life because the chances of you ever making contact with me, even if you have my number, that may not end up doing what you want to do. So we'll talk more about this. I would say just stay close to social media. Add DawgNation on Instagram. Add DawgNation maybe on Twitter. Maybe our bosses want us to keep this off the official feeds as well. In that case, it'll be at DawgNation Daily on Facebook and Instagram, although I've never posted to Insta before, and at Jeff Sintel on Twitter there too. So we're going to do a lot with this. It's going to be a lot of fun. I know many of you have asked about this. I really think it's going to be a good time. With that said, let me kind of move on for a minute and get serious. I was reading, Jeff, something I don't typically do this morning, some of the Houston area newspapers. So last night, North Shore, 5-star running back Zachary Evans' team, took on Katy, Texas. I believe this game was on TV, although I didn't see any of it. But I did read the accounts of that this morning, and some of the local papers were a little, and I love this about Texas high school football, they were a little critical of the North Shore game plan, kind of abandoning the run here in the second half. Statistically, it ends up not being a good night for Evans. I guess he was also on some early first half carries kind of bottled up, so maybe in defense of their coaches, maybe that's what they thought they had to do to win. Katy, the team that North Shore was playing, is a typical power. What do you make, though, of Zachary Evans not exactly showing out in a big-time game against a pretty good Texas team last night? Does this matter to you one way or another?
Yeah, well, I guess selfishly, Georgia fans are happier when Zachary Evans potentially comes to the Bulldogs into Athens in January, where the defenders are not dinged up and he's not overused. But, man, he definitely wasn't overused. I would imagine North Shore Nation football this morning on North Shore Nation Daily podcast, if there is such a thing, they're crying like combined Jim Chaney play calling cries with Mike Bobo run the ball cries, because it looked like Zachary Evans was the most talented 5-star decoy in the state of Texas last night. He had that early touchdown run. I watched most of the game because it seemed like Katy High School especially wanted to play a lot more defense than Georgia Tech did last night, or even some of those Pac-12 teams. But there was a lot of cases where you're like, okay, who's the guy? Again, I really like what Katy did. They had a great scheme. They had some good players in their own right. But it seemed like Zachary Evans, if there is such a thing as high school fantasy football playoffs or anything like that, or a season for high school fantasy football, Zachary Evans did not get first-round pick touches.
So I'll tell you a quick story. In a previous life, I used to broadcast high school football games. One of the games I did one time was Sony Michel for American Heritage Plantation against the other American Heritage. I forget what it's even called, but there's two American Heritage schools. I saw Michel play against the other one, and Jeff, Sony did not have a good night that night. Now, listen, this is well before, obviously, Rose Bowl 2017 and everything Michel became in a Georgia uniform, and I've never pretended to be a scout, but when you see Michel not have a good night, one play in particular stands out to me where, in a kind of a one-on-one situation, he was just wrapped up and tackled by a sophomore, a player that I thought Michel should have been able to juke, and he didn't. And I left that game out of Fort Lauderdale that night thinking, wow, I wonder if Sony Michel is all that he's cracked up to be. Now, as I've said before, I've never pretended to be a scout at any level, certainly at the elite recruiting level, but I guess it goes to show that some of these high school games can be misleading because of the imbalance of power that might exist on one team or the other. We probably saw that with Milton a little bit last week against the nationally ranked team that he was playing. And, Katy is, as I said before, one of the better teams in Texas seemingly every year. That sometimes great players against a team that's better than the rest of the competition or the talent they have around them, sometimes great players don't always pop in these games, right?
Yeah, at any level of football, man. That's what Georgia has, this energy there that a lot of these big-time backs like. Imagine DeAndre Swift running behind Georgia Tech's line last night. That's not going to work out well. Your story there takes me back in time a little bit, and I want to zoom in on one thing. When you called that game, Brandon, was he committed to Georgia yet, or was he still just a hot prospect?
No, he was committed to Georgia by then.
So, this is one of the, this is just an honest reaction. The thing that comes to my mind, and it sort of dovetails into your DeAndre Swift story earlier this program this morning, was that these guys were kind of banged up a lot in high school. Those guys were always having a little nick here and a little nick there.
Yeah.
That's why the pairing was always so great when they had a guy that would be the breadwinner and the bell cow between the tackles, and they could hit the edges. And then when they had enough of a suit of armor from strength and conditioning in college football, they could run between the tackles as well. But aside from that first season when Nick Chubb was hurt and Sony Michel was getting like 24, 25 carries a game as kind of the bell cow running back for Georgia because that was all Georgia had, he never really got a lot of volume at Georgia, and his pro career is already looking like that at the same time. The cool thing would have been, Brandon, if you would have known that sophomore would also end up being a five-star linebacker headed somewhere as well.
There's a very good chance that it indeed probably happened before it's all said and done. I think the overall bottom line to wrap up the Evans portion of our discussion is, after reading the accounts of this game last night, it is now very easy for me to understand why a really good offensive line is an important part of Zachary Evans' profile for the school that he chooses to play at in college. All of a sudden, that philosophy is a little easier for me to understand.
Yeah, I mean, just look at his running style. I mean, on that one play where he broke through, and maybe the biggest, viral moment of the game for Zachary Evans, he gets behind a big lineman and kind of hides and makes the cut off of his back hip plate and everything else, like his back hip pad. And, everybody was coming to get a taste, wanting to watch that game to get a taste out of Zachary Evans. And I think that's what everybody got, just a little taste of what Zachary Evans can do.
I got a lot more I want to talk to you about, Jeff. But before we do that, let me tell folks about my friends at the Atlanta and North Georgia Building Trades Council. For those of you who do this kind of work for a living, this is a group that you want to know a whole lot about because the ANGTBC is dedicated to the work and economic stability of organized construction workers in North America. That means that they're going to find a way to give you a better quality of life, more money in your pocket, really making your work experience better through this organization. It's more work opportunities, it's living wages, and benefits, which are so important in this day and age. You're going to help protect those benefits there as well. So let me give you a couple ways to get in touch with the Atlanta and North Georgia Building Trades Council. Go to GeorgiaConstructionCareers.com. Once again, GeorgiaConstructionCareers.com, or dial this number, 404-584-0005. Once again, that's 404-584-0005. All right, I have a very controversial take about something, Jeff. I now believe that Todd Hartley's Twitter behavior, where it was LeBron and Dwayne Wade a little earlier, it was Jordan and Pippen the other day. This week it's been Kobe throwing the oop pass to Shaq for the dunk. This seems to be a winking nod towards the notion of a super team tandem of tight ends, much the same way that these NBA tandems have gone on to win championships. I now think Hartley's Twitter behavior is the best gimmick of any Georgia assistant coach, and I mean including Sam Pittman's yes sir after the offensive line commits. My favorite, most enjoyable thing is Hartley's NBA tweets there at the moment. I realize it's a controversial take. Where do you stand?
Well, first of all, Brandon, have you seen the latest tweet where it is a picture of former Cosby Show character Theo Huxtable in front of Washington, D.C.? Have you seen that one yet? That's not happened yet, but that should happen, right? Is that the next one, Theo Huxtable in front of Washington, D.C.?
That's a pretty good one. I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind that one, Jeff. That's that would be pretty well done right there. That'd be pretty sharp.
And I to back up a little bit, I don't know, man. That's kind of like giving the title belt to somebody who's you're just trying to crown somebody right out of the gate, man. Sam Pittman has put together 2 or 3 years of this. He's doing it with words and video and pictures and wardrobe and soundtrack. I can't vault Todd Hartley over Sam Pittman just yet, sir. And I think our viewers will probably back me up on that one.
Probably a little bit of a prisoner of the moment, I'll admit that, but it is a fun way to communicate what Hartley is either thinking he's already done with maybe Washington and Johnson, or maybe assuming he will be able to get done. I think it's kind of a fun way to communicate all of this. And just like a quick couple seconds synopsis on this, I know we talked about this a bunch on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger this past Wednesday. I mean, you think when it comes to these three guys that we talk a lot about, the Johnsons, the Washingtons, and you can add a Rick Gilbert there in some form or fashion, whether Georgia leads for him or not, you think that that Hartley wouldn't be tweeting this kind of stuff if he didn't feel like he was in pretty good shape. He's not setting himself up to let folks down on signing day, that apparently he thinks the Dogs have a pretty good in with some of these elite guys at this position at the moment.
I tell you, Brandon, the way that man recruits and the way this staff recruits, what they want to do is they want to add 2 elite players to that room and to that position. I mean, I wouldn't put it past Georgia some years to go flip Notre Dame's number 1 and number 2 tight ends committed right now in the country if that's what they wanted to do. But that's what's happening here. It's a funny gimmick about great players playing with each other and winning championships. And that's been the pitch for the longest time with the tight end room at Georgia. They have 3 guys that they've really wanted, and there's really been some good rapport back and forth or a connection there. And Georgia wants to sign 2 of those in 2020.
Hey, let me do something kind of serious before we get out of here. I thought you had some really good reporting, or at least analysis is probably the better word than reporting, at the forum at forum.dawgnation.com on the travel roster for Georgia this weekend. It is a source of curiosity because the roster's never been deeper than it is right now. 85 guys on scholarship. You can only travel 70. A couple of the guys that travel presumably won't be on scholarships, which means a lot of good scholarship players for Georgia are going to be watching this game on TV on Saturday night, which is just an unfortunate byproduct of the rules that are in place. But I did want to kind of hammer down some of this stuff with you for a second, and I want to invite folks to check out your forum thread about. It's in the hurry up intel at the forum at forum.dawgnation.com. They can kind of follow along with this themselves, and they should be checking this out every single day. It's absolutely free. Let me start at running back. Are you of the belief that Kenny McIntosh is going to Nashville this weekend?
Yeah, see, that's the tough one for me. You were mentioning those preferred walk-ons. Well, Prather Hudson is one of the best special teams players for Georgia on the team. And here's where it gets dicey, because if you add a 6th running back, which is Kenny McIntosh, that means you've got to take 1 less DB or you got to take 1 less receiver, because you were correct to point out that preferred walk-ons, let's face it, the 2 snappers, you got to have 2 of those guys, because if one goes down, you don't have a snapper. Those are your 2 guys right there, and you have premium special teams players, a guy like Prather Hudson. There's also Jake Stoll to think about. There's also Willie Erdman, who's a great special teams player that's also one of the veteran slot guys on the team. But drilling down there on the running back spot, it's precarious, man, because it's all very one position group you take affects another position group. So Jamari Sawyer's health, what's that going to mean? Does that mean Georgia only takes 11 offensive linemen, and then they can take the 6th running back? And the sixth running back to me is one of the most fascinating things on this travel roster. Folks are going to see when that drops on Saturday evening is, okay, DeAndre Swift, not likely to get a lot of run. Nobody in their right mind expects 12 carries, 15 carries a game for one DeAndre Swift. Okay, are you going to overtax Zamir in his first game back? Are you going to give him 15 to 20 carries? Probably not. So then you got James Cook, also not primarily a between the tackles, give him 20 touches, give him 20 carries a game guy. And then Brian Herrien. So Brian Herrien and Kenny McIntosh might be the most likely guys to get 15 carries on Saturday against Vanderbilt. So that's why six running back is a very good question if you want to get deep in the weeds. And one of the things that just, boggles my mind, and it's all about depth here, is there's a group of about six defensive backs, Brandon. Chris Smith the second, William Poole the third, Amir Speed, Latravius Brini, Tyreek McGee. Those are guys that have made a lot of 70 man for Georgia in the past, but look how Georgia has changed its defensive back room.
Yep.
It's brought in the middle of that defensive back room. I believe that Tyreek Stevenson is now a top 6 defensive back at Georgia. I believe Lewis Seen is a top 8 defensive back. I believe DJ Daniel is a top 4 defensive back at Georgia. Right away, you've got 3 or 4 guys. And then with the ascension of Mark Webb, and don't forget Devon Wilson, a guy that was very sporty last year at the tail end of the year. Those are 4 guys where Georgia's top 8 or 9 defensive backs have 4 new guys that were on the team last year. And that's why I think it's a lot harder for a Speed, a Brini, Poole, a Smith, guys like that, very good players, mind you, to make the 70-man travel squad this weekend.
Let me do a couple of these others really fast. It's commonly believed that Robert Beal will be suspended on Saturday, dating back to his arrest during spring practice on the misdemeanor marijuana charge. Let's say that wasn't true, though, Jeff. If Beal was a player in good standing for this particular Saturday, do you think that would put Adam Anderson into any jeopardy of not going on this trip, or do you think he's safe?
Yeah, a lot of people wonder about Adam. Adam's just a great special teams player, and he's one of the better pass rushers they have on third down in the game. And folks got to remember, if this game matriculates like folks think it will, then Georgia's going to play at least 12 defensive backs because they're in nickel and dime a lot, and that means you need at least a whole first team of 5 defensive backs, and then you need a second team of 5 defensive backs. I think Adam Anderson is a guy that will likely make the bus, especially with Beal's situation right now. I would kind of say that, Anderson and Beal are kind of right there neck and neck in terms of their value with Georgia. And it's a crowded room, Brandon, with so much depth where you have Georgia, look what it did there. Yeah, it lost Brenton Cox to Florida, or watched Brenton Cox go off to Florida, but then Georgia adds a Nolan Smith, Georgia adds a Jermaine Johnson, and then Georgia has a healthy Azeez Ojulari. So, again, Ledbetter's gone, Keon Richardson is gone, Walter Grant is still there. I mean, we're going to keep calling it Georgia problems, but these are going to be the type of problems folks might have if they have to look an extra little bit longer at the view tonight from some rooftop bar in Nashville where Brandon Adams is buying for everybody wearing a Georgia G in the house.
Don't even start that now. Don't even start that at all. But, to finish this topic off, obviously we've talked every single storyline for this season to death over the course of the last few months. There is still, though, one part of this whole travel roster, who plays, who doesn't, who's healthy, who's not, that somehow I still kind of think has sort of stayed a little underreported. Jeff, if Georgia doesn't have a Julian Rochester healthy enough to travel to Nashville or a David Marshall healthy enough to travel to Nashville, I think those are pretty big losses. Now, I know that some people have hoped for more from Rochester than maybe they've gotten. I think this may be the year that happens. I think that David Marshall, when he plays, has been a really competent defensive lineman for you. When you look at having the best possible defensive line that Georgia can have, the veterans presence of Rochester and Marshall, for me, is a part of that. If we're in the press box tomorrow looking at a list that doesn't have either Marshall or Rochester's name on it, I don't think it hurts Georgia versus Vanderbilt, but it is a little bit of a disappointment for me in terms of what I hope the defensive line depth becomes.
Yeah, that's another, we can get into the weeds there with travel rosters, but when I do a lot of this research for our freshman reports, Brandon, I look at how many guys typically Kirby brings to big games and SEC games on the road. It sounds pretty shocking that Georgia only brings about 7 true defensive linemen, and I mean interior defensive line type guys, the noses, the nose guards, the zeros, the ones, the twos, the three techniques, and like that. And you start going Malik Herring, Devontae Wyatt, Trayvon Walker, Michael Barnett, and then you go Jordan Davis, and then you go, who else is in the mix? Is it Tramel Walthour? You talk about all those guys you just mentioned. It's Marshall, it's Mikhail Carter, and it's also Julian Rochester, three of the older players, more developed players on the team. And if they're not on that list, I think it means it's a sign of where their health is at, especially for the Vanderbilt game, when you can only bring so many few guys. And again, Barnett, to me, is a major story, how he's developed over the last year at Georgia, where he might even have starters reps now for the Bulldogs, along with Jordan Davis at the nose guard, the nose tackle position. And then you see a guy like Justin Young, who just continually gets a little bit better every year. And that defensive line group looks different with a guy like Wyatt, a guy like Walker, all these new faces at Georgia. A lot of these guys that were on the bus that were in their top 7 a year ago that had eligibility left might not make it to some of these early games, Brandon. And that's how the depth from Georgia, 1 through 85, especially 85 through 50, have changed a lot over the last recruiting cycle even.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun thing to watch, and as you said before, your freshman report after these games has become one of my favorite things to read at DawgNation.com. I'll look forward to reading that from you. Again, coming off the weekend, I'll look forward to being in the car with you later on our way to Nashville. DawgNation Libation tonight, and then the start of the season tomorrow. Jeff, I can't wait for it. Thanks for being with us.
Yes, sir. Have a good day.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So one more quick thing on the travel roster. Obviously, in terms of beating a team like Vanderbilt, the 70 that you take doesn't determine the win or the loss there. Next September at Alabama, in a game that's razor thin, who you choose to take and the versatility of those number 66, 67, 68, guys that get on the bus there to go to Tuscaloosa, that can be a factor in the win and the loss. It's almost like, for those of you who follow Major League Baseball, your 25-man playoff roster, third catcher or extra pitcher or whatever else like that. That's a strategic decision that could determine a win or a loss. In a close game, those final couple roster spots can determine that. For Vanderbilt, that's not the expectation, but it is a pretty interesting look into the current hierarchy within the program of kind of who's where on certain depth charts for a program that likes to keep some of that kind of stuff secret. The 70-man travel roster gives you a little bit of an indication on that. That's one of the reasons why it's a source of curiosity. It doesn't, matter a ton in terms of winning or losing this game, but for those who want to know the true thoughts of Kirby Smart, you can find at least a window into that when it comes to the travel roster. Hey, real quickly before we roll on with our SEC through, let me remind you about my friends at MyBookie here for a moment. They're doing a couple really fun things here this year. First of all, the first ever online handicapping super contest. It's just $100 to win. First place guaranteed to win at least $100,000. Pick 5 NFL games against the spread, and then you can kind of climb the leaderboard and ultimately take home your share of the winnings. That's good stuff. Also, big deposit bonuses here. You can get up to $1,000 first deposit bonus from MyBookie. You can double your first deposit, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. It's all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be, D-A-W-G. Use the promo code DawgNation and simply find MyBookie online. Type in MyBookie. Type in MyBookie in your browser, find MyBookie, use the promo code DawgNation. You get a big deposit when you sign up for the first time. Speaking of that, let me give you a couple of my thoughts on some of these games this weekend. I'm going to try to rattle through some of these pretty quick. Memphis has been a slight favorite at about a touchdown or so at home against Ole Miss all weekend. I think they cover this number. I think Ole Miss loses. I think this is the worst team in the SEC. I believe they prove it on Saturday. Duke and Alabama, the line hasn't changed much here at all on the heels of the suspensions or the Dylan Moses injury. It dipped down to like 33.5 at one point in time, but that was pre-injury. It's actually gone up, I think, over the 35 where it was to start the week. That should be instructive. Individual injuries in college football don't matter as much as anyone thinks. NFL is pretty much the same way. Fans have a tendency to overrate injuries. Moses' absence doesn't move the point spread at all for the game against Duke, nor does it move a figurative line for an SEC championship against Alabama. There's going to be an attrition on both sides by the time you get to December. As big of a headline as the Moses injury is, and it certainly comes at the wrong position for Alabama, I don't think this changes the outcome this season for them much one way or another. Intuitively, that doesn't seem like it should be true, but there's a mountain of evidence that backs this up. fans overrate the value of injuries. Even quarterbacks, for the most part, are only worth a couple points a game. There are a couple in college football that may be worth as much as a touchdown, but even that, fewer than you might think. So Alabama on Saturday, I believe, probably weathers the Moses injury just fine. I still like Duke to cover, though, because David Cutcliffe's actually been pretty good against the spread. We talked about this week as part of our Go With The Flow show sponsored by R.S. Andrews. South Carolina versus North Carolina, I'll take the Gamecocks there. I think North Carolina's just a bad team, and I think they have an old coach. I think that's a poor recipe. Give me the Gamecocks there on that side. I've liked Auburn all offseason long against Oregon. Nothing for me to change on that. The freshman quarterback, Bo Nix, could I see him being a little shaky here? Yeah, I probably could. Do I think the Auburn defense makes up for that? I probably do there as well. You may think, well, does that bring the under into play? And sometimes when that happens, the underdog has a better shot. I think the Auburn wins this game comfortably, even with a shaky game from Nix, likely in his first start. Give me Auburn like a couple touchdowns here over Oregon. Ducks, even with a good offensive line, not a team that I respect right now. Missouri is strangely going to Laramie, Wyoming. I think Missouri's really motivated this year. They're like a 17.5-point favorite, even more than that in some places, moving towards the Cowboys there. Every game for Missouri is a bowl because, as it stands right now, they're facing a postseason ban. So they play motivated behind Kelly Bryant. They win this game 3 touchdowns at least. Houston against Oklahoma on Sunday outside the SEC. Cougars have actually, over the course of the last couple years, been really good as an underdog over the course of a couple different coaching tenures. I think that probably keeps up on Saturday. Oklahoma doesn't get scared by Houston, but maybe a game a little closer than you might think. And then Notre Dame against Louisville on Monday. I was tempted to go Louisville plus the 20. Connor Raleigh talked me out of that because of just simply how bad Louisville is. That's probably the right side on that game. So Notre Dame helps preserve the hype for the Week 4 showdown against UGA. They'll cover easily versus Louisville, and we'll make that your SEC through. And for a couple of minutes, I want to talk about the start of the upcoming season because, as you can tell, and hopefully you can tell this all the time here at DawgNation Daily, we're just excited about college football. We just love it, excited about being in Nashville, seeing so many of you. And off the top of the program, I picked Georgia to win the national championship. And even if this season that weren't to come true, I'm still going to end up just being really glad to have college football as a part of my life. And I'm sure many of you feel the same way. I may regret telling this story, but I'm going to tell it just really, really quick. We all kind of go through like ups and downs in our life, happy times, weird times, kind of everything in between. Sometimes I look back on the 2012 SEC championship game, and for like a weird reason, I was like watching that game by myself. You ever have one of these like weird things, or you just kind of a weird time in your life, a lot going on, friends were doing other things. I only had one child at the time. He was less than a year old. My wife was off doing something with him. So here I am, like sitting in the dark, watching the 2012 SEC championship all by myself. Now, the truth is, I don't mind watching a game by myself because it's, you're really into it and it's obviously really, really engaging. But admittedly, Georgia was playing better that day than I expected them to. I didn't, I hate to say this as a fan, but I didn't really go into that game thinking that Georgia was going to win that game. I assumed it was going to be a little bit like the previous year's SEC championship game would have been. And, Georgia, which got blown out by LSU, that eventually Alabama would win comfortably in 2012. And here we have all day long in this game, Georgia's kind of on top and in a lead, and I'm sort of watching this by myself in my house, and it seems like all the more likely that, man, Georgia may be able to pull off an upset here that was unforeseeable for me before the start of the game. And I'm obviously really, really excited about that, but it starts to feel a little weird to me that I'm watching it by myself. So you fast forward to the end, and of course all of you know how the game ends. The odd moment with Chris Conley and maybe Georgia should spike the football one way or another. They just run out of time down there near the goal line. Now, I'm not proud of this, and so please don't assume that I am. But as devastated as I was when that happened, just like all of us, we're all devastated back in 2012. As devastated as I was when that happened, there was, like, deep in my psyche, like well buried below everything else, this tiny tinge of relief that the big moment wasn't going to happen for Georgia with me having no one to share it with. And listen, I've got plenty of friends. I just was watching it by myself that day. But there was like this tiny sense of relief of, okay, good. This wasn't that moment, because the last thing you want is to have Georgia beat a foe like Alabama and not have someone to high five, not have someone to hug, not have some there along those lines, which kind of fast forwards us to the future here. I know it's like the most tired internet meme in the world, the fringe you make along the way. I do get how like corny and cliche that all sounds, but 100 years from now, the people that you watch games with will be what you remember more than the actual outcome of those games. And I'm really, really lucky. Going to Nashville, I'll be around a lot of you. I've got friends and family there. I've got the folks that I work with here at DawgNation. So as you get ready to start this upcoming season, I hope that you find yourself in much the same way, surrounded by people that if you don't love them, at least you like them, that have the same passion for UGA that you do. Big tailgate tomorrow, big watch party at the house, whatever it is, and I hope you have that all season long. I gave you my prediction off the top of the program. I don't know if it's going to turn out to be true. I don't know that it's going to end up in the sort of happy national championship sense we all want it to end up. I have a feeling it might, and when it does, I hope you find yourself with plenty of people to hug and plenty of people to pat on the back and plenty of folks to give a high five. I hope you have a truly, truly special season. With that in mind, let me give you a couple of ideas of what's coming up over the course of the weekend with our Kroger kickoff. Of course, we kick off the weekend with our friends at Kroger, getting stocked for those watching parties, getting ready to watch the game, and we get kicked off with a lot to look ahead to with UGA athletics, including tonight. And I put this on the official rundown, DawgNation Libation, somewhere in downtown Nashville tonight, or hopefully through a series of places at downtown Nashville. I hope you'll check us out for that. Hit us up on social media. We'll look forward to getting together with you. And then, of course, tomorrow on now ESPN. The game was originally scheduled for the SEC Network. I guess is it the Boise State Florida State move that got this thing moved to ESPN? One way or another, a game that was supposed to be on the SEC Network is now on ESPN. And then, of course, also start thinking a little bit towards next Saturday, home opener versus Murray State. Of course, the big headline there is going to be the honor for Vince Dooley. We'll have a lot of Dooley-themed stuff heading towards next week as well. So home opener a week from now in Athens. We'll see some of you there for that as Vince Dooley gets an honor that he richly, richly deserves. But for now, we're going to get ready to make our way to Nashville. And for those of you who are doing that, sure enough, stay safe and have a good time. And if you are around the stadium or around Broadway or kind of wherever else, make sure you come on by and see us. We'd love to talk to you and say thanks for your support of DawgNation, and we'll take a moment to appreciate what we hope is going to be a really fun and special season. Of course, a lot of work for Georgia to do between now and the month of November, but we don't stop thinking about those Gators. Gator Hater Updater, how about it's now 1,035 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. That is good news. Apart from DawgNation Libation tonight, we have a big day tomorrow. Kroger kickoff before the game. We'll bring you some dog walk coverage and some discussion about what's going to happen on the field against the Commodores that night. And then our DawgNation postgame show live from the field after the game. Hear from Kirby Smart, Georgia players, Jeff Sintel, me, our thoughts on the game. And we'll see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And on video, a lot gets covered there with that. And we will take some time to have some of your comments and questions here, too. We'll try to keep doing what we have been doing, which is kind of rapid fire our way through a lot of these. But we are going to have to get off the air because we're going to have to get on the road here sooner rather than later. So let me pull up the Facebook. Let me get rolling. And we shall see what is going on. Billy Hurley giving you the and on video. Appreciate that. John Chappell says, why am I picturing BA with a Schlitz box of Cheetos and sitting in the dark? It wasn't quite that bad, John. But thank you for giving us that visual. Thank you for that visual. Jimmy Guthrie says he was actually in a bar with like 200 people back in 2012, and everybody was really gracious. So that's good to be able to hear. Chris Branham says everybody enjoy the game tomorrow. Yeah, I hope they do for sure. Joel Moody talking about Priestley, the number 3 quarterback. Everything I've been led to believe, including some of the stuff that kind of seeps out from those scrimmages, is that Priestley is that number 3 guy for Georgia right now. Obviously, DeJuan Mathis is continuing to battle a health situation, so he's still a good ways away from being able to play, I would think. And Priestley is looking to be the number 3 quarterback right now. I don't know that if, let's say Georgia's up 50-0, Are they playing Priestley at some point? Maybe they might. They may want to just give extra time to Stetson Bennett right now, but I would say that as of now, he is definitely the number 3 quarterback. Our buddy Connor Riley also joins us here as well. Matt Rukavina talking about the block punt from Ogletree back in 2012. Yeah, that was a moment. Georgia went up 21-10 after the Ogletree block, I believe, for sure. Chris Branham says the Connor cam is now up and running. Connor, what you got on your mind today?
I thought you did a really good job, summarizing. Make sure to enjoy the season. We talk about the pressure, the expectations to win a national championship more than anyone, but don't lose the forest through the trees here. Just because Georgia is supposed to beat Tennessee, beat Auburn, beat Florida this year, don't just overlook and take those wins for granted, because you only have to look back about a decade ago to see when Florida was just running this rivalry and how unfun it was.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The 2018 season for most people was probably not what they would categorize as one of the more fun seasons, even though it may be the second best Georgia team of my lifetime, and yet it was one of the lesser fun seasons. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that people have a tendency to do is discount an easy win as something other than a big win. Beating top 15 Kentucky on the road last year was a big win. Beating Florida for the second year in a row last year was a big win. Thankfully, here at DawgNation, we treated those games as such. And I just think both practically for an enjoyment of your life standpoint and objectively in terms of your analysis of football, those are wins you have to count in the big win category. So when things like that happen this year, take Tennessee, for instance. Most people think Tennessee's not going to be very good. How many of y'all have been to Knoxville over the years and seen Georgia play terrible? Georgia goes up there this year and wins that game by a couple touchdowns. I don't care if Tennessee's good or not. Mm-hmm. It's still a fun and big win, and I'm glad to hear you say that there as well.
They're going to have a tough task since they're going up against Jared Garantano, who you think is just the second coming of Peyton Manning.
Listen, I have given 3,000 or 4,000 opinions here over the course of the spring and summer. Some are going to be right, some are going to be wrong. I am actually fairly confident that Garantano has a good year. I think that Chaney's a better offensive coordinator than some of y'all think. So I'll stick with Garantano having a pretty good year. James Crump, though, mentions one of the opinions that I'm likely to be wrong about. One of the things we do in this space a good bit as a part of our R.S. Andrews School Day. And by the way, make sure you check out our friends at R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com. One of the things we do a lot is make predictions within the microfibers of Georgia about who's going to start and who's going to do this and who's going to do that. I have been saying for a while that I don't care what the practice reports say. I believe that Cager will eventually start the first game over Matt Landers. I'm backing off that now. I do think Landers starts tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So we're keeping a ledger of rights and wrongs. You can put my Cager starts the first game in a wrong category. But the one thing I believe I'm going to be right about, though, is that the Pickens and the Blaylocks, their emergence. Is emergence? Is that a word?
Emergence is a word.
Okay, good. That eventually happens more like post Notre Dame, Tennessee, second half of the year. I've said this now a lot. I'll say it again. Tomorrow is about receivers who've been here or receivers who've played major college football before. I believe that D-Rob leads the team in receptions. I believe that Tyler Simmons is on the field a ton. Landers is going to get his chance. I do believe that Cager may be the number 4 guy tomorrow. I believe that. It's about guys who've either been at Georgia or played major college football before. And Pickens is going to play. Blaylock's going to play, of course. But their moment, I believe, comes once I start wearing long sleeves to work every single day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I put maybe more stock in Dominic Blaylock than any player on this team this year. I said he's going to lead Georgia in receiving.
Would you sell some of that right now if you could?
Of course not. I'm not a coward. I still think he's going to have a really big year and a really great season for this team. And the reality is he only has to be the leading receiver after the end of the last game. So he's got 14, 15 games to do it. Another prediction you're going to be wrong about, though, I have to mention it, just James Cook. I mean, again, an hour, 4 minutes into the show, you talk about Kenny McIntosh and just no love for James Cook.
I tell you, I will never be so happy to be wrong. And it will be funny. It's like if he scores like 4 touchdowns on Saturday, like Monday, and because like you have to be like a regular DawgNation Daily listener or viewer to even know this topic. The casual person doesn't even aware of this, but when they tune in to watch the show like normal on Monday, and like the whole comment section just people bashing me for an opinion I'm not even quite sure I hold, that's going to be kind of a fun thing to see. Will Scott also bringing up another prediction. He says 0% chance that Mays starts over Cleveland. I don't believe it's 0% chance. A lot of people even think that Mays is going to start, but I am with you, Will, that I believe it will be Cleveland. But I don't believe it's 0% chance. Kirby did say something last night, if y'all listen to the radio show, that was kind of like, I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I was listening to a couple minutes of it. Boy, he sounded not so happy to be there. But he said something about Mays in Cleveland that almost made it sound like he was leaning towards Mays, but I could just be reading in on that. And if y'all heard it, maybe you heard it differently than I did. But I'm going Cleveland to start at right guard. That's been my prediction. I believe ultimately it plays out much like the spring did. It was Mays, playing for real on TV. Cleveland starting, Mays is backing up. I really believe that's what's going to happen on Saturday night there as well. Because, actually, say what you want to say.
I think it's going to be Mays.
Because, am I right to say this or am I wrong to say this? Y'all can tell me, and then we're going to get a bunch of YouTube comments. There are two ways you can hurt yourself in recruiting. You can not play young players, and you become the program that doesn't give young players a chance. But can't you also hurt yourself with, guy did nothing wrong, he was hurt, he's healthy now, he's probably going to the NFL, and they just jerked him out of the starting lineup to put in Cade Mays, who legitimately deserves to start. I mean, there's not a single thing wrong with Cade Mays. He legitimately deserves to start. But isn't there fertile negative recruiting soil if they bench Cleveland for reasons not of his doing? Because I really do think that that's one of the untold stories of negative recruiting. I think there's way more planting doubts in players' minds of, are you sure you want to go there? Look what they did to Ben Cleveland. I think there's way more of that than goes on than any of us ever understand.
Couldn't you also say that we're going to play the best players, and that's more appealing to young players?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because you can go off the bank on the left side or you can go off the bank on the right side. That's a fair point.
And the reality is, I think both are going to play a lot.
I do too.
Given the lack of depth at the tight end position, I think we're going to see a lot of, maybe they don't do a whole lot of two tight end sets this year, but they go one tight end and then they.
You don't think they're doing two tight end sets this year?
I'd be pretty surprised.
Who's the best blocking tight end on this team right now? Wolf?
I kind of have to say it's Charlie Warner because Eli Wolf and John Fitzpatrick are not big dudes.
And I'm not saying that Warner's a bad blocking tight end, but
that was not what he was used for.
Yeah, he was a wide receiver coming out of high school. I think of him as your athletic tight end. So you want that blocking tight end on the other side. That'll be an interesting thing to see.
Did you mentioned the Kirby Smart radio press conference? Did you see what Nick Saban had to say?
Yes, I did.
Last night on his show
about the trash talking.
And again, the language is a little colorful here, but if you want to talk shit to the other team, join the goddamn debate team.
Oh, you can't
Nick
say
Saban
that.
said last night.
Bleep yourself, please. By all means. Yeah, that was pretty wild.
I don't personally agree with that opinion, but I respect Saban for having that stance.
Yeah. Yes. Craig Hill says Mays is second man up to all the positions on the line. Just because he doesn't start doesn't mean he's least valuable. He would get as many snaps as anyone. Yeah, I agree with that. Many snaps as anyone may be somewhat up for a debate, but in terms of being a guy that's on the field a lot and being incredibly valuable, there's really very few teams that Mays would not start for at this point in time. For sure. Let's go back over to YouTube here just for a moment. Beast builds on James Cook. Yeah, no one thinks he's not going to play, but I do think that Kirby is pulling our leg a little bit when he talks about the idea of 4 running backs. Now, does Cook eventually become one of those 3 running backs? I think there's a chance that happens, but you're not going to give 4 running backs equal carries or equal opportunities to produce no matter what anybody else says. You're not going to do that for sure. Antoine Simpson says playing the best player at that position is the best thing for the team, hands down. Yeah, I think that's probably true. However, if it's equal, I think you got to be careful pushing a guy out when it's not of his doing, because I don't think anyone has come up with any reason why Cleveland might not be in there. It might just be an example of, well, Mays is just too good to keep off the field. So I'm with all of you that you've got to put the 5 best players out there. But in the case of Mays in Cleveland, this may indeed be an example of it's actually really hard to decipher one from the other. Yeah, so there you go. James Crump says the Sawyer leg injury has messed him up playing on the offensive line. Yeah, I actually do think he's legitimately hurt. I think that I mean, I would even suggest there's a pretty good chance that he doesn't even go to Nashville, that he's dealing with a legitimate injury.
I find it pretty interesting that they closed practice on Wednesday. That makes me believe that, and this is, again, reckless speculation, but we didn't see Sawyer Monday or Tuesday. Kirby Smart has said he was behind where Nakobe Dean was in terms of his rehab and getting back from that. Kind of leads me on to believe that we will not see Sawyer make this trip, which is kind of a bummer given that he had a really good spring and a very productive summer and was a guy who Georgia could have used in certain situations when they want to go jumbo package, put 7 guys on the offensive line. And, last year Georgia only had one starter start and finish every game, so that shows you in alone how important depth is. So to not have a guy like that in this game, well, it shouldn't matter too much. It is sort of a bummer for Sawyer.
Yeah, I think it is as well, because I think that he's probably not all that different from Cade Mays. I do think that, Mays being an early enrollee gave him a chance to get on the field a little earlier last year, and I think that Sawyer potentially is just as good an offensive lineman. It just so happens that that Mays is a little ahead of him right now here at the moment. James Crump says Kirby's going to want to destroy Vandy defense with the run. They will not be able to block Cleveland when we run. Yeah, it's kind of the funny thing. I do think Cleveland is probably a really good offensive lineman. I do. Although I do think that Cade Mays is probably a really good one there as well. He is probably, as Jeff Sentel said when he joined us earlier, a pretty good problem to have. Top Dog says the UGA offense is going to turn it up this year. Defense will too. We're about to see the best, most complete UGA team we've ever seen. Yeah, and I said this off the top of the program. Sometimes bias, I think, works in kind of a funny, tricky way, because the average person assumes that bias makes you think that everything about your team is great. But I think that door actually swings both ways a little bit. I think that because you watch your team more closely than you watch every other team, I think you have a tendency to overemphasize the things that your team doesn't do that well. You do this in all sports. Braves fans are kind of the same way. Now, are the Braves better than the Dodgers? They may not be, but are the Braves bullpen significantly worse than, a lot of other teams?
Yes.
We probably have a tendency to sort of over-assume some of that kind of stuff there as well. And I think with Georgia, you look at the issues with the wide receiver, you look at the issues with the defensive line, you look at the issues with the havoc, you look at some of those things that Georgia is imperfect on. There is no team that doesn't have imperfections. I guess almost use double negative. Clemson's got, as Connor pointed out earlier this week, inexperience with its defensive tackles. Alabama's worked to death by its linebackers right now, maybe with good reason. We have a tendency to maybe overemphasize some of Georgia's strengths at times. We also probably have a tendency to overemphasize some of Georgia's perceived weaknesses, too. That's an important thought to keep in mind as we kind of go through this.
Clemson, yes, they won and yes, they covered. So, the axiom, good teams win, great teams covered. But Georgia Tech gifted Clemson a lot of stuff last night. They muffed a punt. They had another turnover in the red zone. Clemson did not. I know what the score says, but actually watching that game, and Trevor Lawrence, more interceptions than touchdown passes last night. It was not the same Clemson team that we saw against Alabama a season ago. But I know not everyone saw that game last night because I would say 60-70% of the country just can't even get the SEC network. I know I had to watch it off an illegal stream myself.
I didn't see it. Yeah, I didn't see it. Garrett Horn says, I want to understand Brandon's brain. We talk about
good luck.
Yeah, exactly. My wife's been trying to do that for going on 20 years. We talk about playing the more talented player. Cleveland compared to Mays. So how do you say Harrion deserves over James Cook? He's not more talented than Cook. Cleveland and Harrion are elite, but they aren't better than Mays and Cook. So that's a great question, Garrett. I'm glad you asked. My argument in favor of Brian Harrion, over the course of the last couple of weeks, I've played a lot of this audio. And if you actually go look at my On the East piece from Georgia's Own Credit Unit, DawgNation.com, I certainly quoted a lot of these pieces. Kirby Smart, for virtually 4 years, has been very consistent with Brian Harrion. He has essentially said something along the lines of, this is a good player who's waiting his turn. We see this from Brian in practice every single day. There was a moment for him against Vanderbilt last year, for instance, where he kind of does kind of a fancy move, and everybody kind of loses their mind over that. Kirby's asked about it, and he says, this is the kind of stuff we've been seeing from Brian now for a couple of years. Y'all don't see it, but we see it all the time. He has said that enough, and I'm talking about half dozen instances of him saying something kind of like that. 2016, 2017, he and Holyfield were given a lot of credit for, much the same way that Stetson Bennett was kind of the scout team quarterback. There were some rumblings and whispers that Harrion and Holyfield were doing good work as scout team style running backs against the first team defense, and that's two pretty good scout team running backs, but that was kind of some of the talk that was kind of coming out of that then. That I believe that Harrion behind the scenes has been putting together a consistent body of work, much the same way Holyfield did a year ago. Is James Cook the more talented player between the two? I think there's a chance that may be true. He may be faster, he may be more elusive, and he may get his chance to do that there as well. But I believe that Kirby wants to reward Harrion for what has been time served. Time in the program. I know that did come
when I hear time served, I think of prison sentence.
No, that didn't come out the right way. He wants to reward him for what he's done in the program up to this point in time. So that's my nod over it. It's not my belief that Harrion's for sure a better running back than James Cook. If Cook travels down the same path, it'll be him we're talking about this in this role a couple of years from now. I do think Kirby sees some value in adding to the morale of the team and being able to point to a couple guys and say, see, if you'll just do what I say and be here and stick with us, eventually you'll be like this guy is, and you'll be like that guy is. I think Kirby likes creating that pipeline. It's an assumption on my part, and it may be that Cook's talent is just so prodigious that he jumps the line here. Or maybe an injury changes all of this, and Cook gets his chance through all of that. But I do see Kirby Smart, at least with the things I've heard him say publicly, seemingly setting up a pathway that is pretty similar to the one that Holyfield traveled last year. So that is my thought process, and we'll all find out together if it's correct or if it's incorrect.
You want to go some rapid fire predictions for this weekend?
Sure, we can do that.
Most rushing yards on the team. Georgia's leading rusher against Vanderbilt is Harrion.
Yeah.
I think it's Harrion as well. Leading receiver.
Robertson.
Over under 3.5 sacks.
I'll go under. I think they get 3.
Most passing yards this weekend: Jacob Eason, Justin Fields, Jake Fromm.
Who is Washington playing?
Eastern Washington.
Who is Ohio State playing?
Florida Atlantic.
I think Eason's probably the safest bet there of those 3.
I'm taking Fromm.
I do think they're going to throw. I think Washington probably throws a lot, although admittedly I don't know a ton about their running back situation.
Who are your 4 college football playoff teams to end the season?
I'll go Georgia. I'll go Clemson. I'll go Ohio State. And I will go. Who is my 4? I don't think it's LSU. Boy, that's a good question. Who is my 4th playoff team? Because I don't believe it's Oklahoma. I don't believe it's Texas. Does some weird team sneak in from the Pac-12? I don't have a great answer for my 4th team there on that. Because I don't think it's a second SEC team. I don't think it's Oklahoma. Do you get 2 Big Ten teams in after kind of punishing the Big Ten for a couple of years, at least seemingly punishing them? I'm sorry I don't have a good 4th answer, but I don't have a good 4th team right now.
Georgia is the number 1 seed, 13-0. Clemson as the number 2 team, 13-0. Michigan, 12-1, Big Ten champions, and a win over Ohio State. And the 4th team is Oklahoma. They go 12-1. I know you're not high on Jalen Hurts, but the Big 12 is down this year. Texas is not going to be as good. They're not the 10th best team in the country. And I think LSU should have their way with them when they meet next week. Are you really telling me Iowa State's going to – and granted, they beat Oklahoma 2 years ago, but are you really telling me Iowa State, I look at that schedule. I think Oklahoma's going to lose a game, but I just don't see how Oklahoma loses twice. And, as far as Alabama, these injuries are starting to rack up, and I believe that if Alabama loses in the SEC championship game to Georgia, like I think they do, because I have Georgia going undefeated. I think that the committee is going to want to keep them out because they're going to have the most recent data point will have been a loss. I think, and as I've said, Michigan and Oklahoma will both have one loss. Michigan will have played a real legit schedule, and it comes down to essentially the same thing we saw a year ago between Georgia and Oklahoma. I think it's the same thing, only this time it's Oklahoma and Alabama, and I think they're going to put Oklahoma in again, even though I believe at the end of the season, Alabama will be the better team than Oklahoma.
Memphis Dog says BA didn't mention Michigan. I do think that Michigan's going to have a good team this year. This is one of those moments in which I kind of go against the grain a little bit. I know it's fun for many in the media to kind of bag on Harbaugh, and I probably enjoyed doing that from time to time myself. But I do think that Michigan may be set up for more success this year than maybe the average fan thinks, although ultimately I do believe that Ohio State's likely the better team. Now, what happens with Fields and Fromm both in the playoff, who knows? But I do think that in terms of what the hysteria would be like, but I do think that's probably the most likely overall outcome there.
With Ohio State, I have to see Justin Fields be a better quarterback. And second, as much as we like to brag on Urban Meyer and say this, that, and the other about him and who he is, and how he's run his programs, his team's won a lot of games. Florida really struggled replacing him and moving on. And this is Ryan Day's first time running a ship by himself. And I just wonder, is there going to be a drop-off because this is Day's first time doing it where, they lose maybe 2 or 3 games that they shouldn't because there's a step down going from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day.
All right, we're going to get ready to get on the road, head towards Nashville. Thanks all of you for being here with us this week. Of course, thanks for the AJC for making really good news for us every single day. You can get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Heading towards the weekend. One thing to also be watching on the serious front, I heard the governor talking this morning. There is a really unpredictable, at least seemingly, I don't follow the weather on a regular basis, but I'm talking about, seriously follow the weather on a regular basis. But this storm that's moving in, I know many of you kind of listen to us in South Georgia and places like that, unpredictable at the moment of how's this thing going to cut and turn as it kind of, goes across Florida into Georgia. I know the coast is bracing for this, but there's also, I guess, parts of south central and southwest Georgia could potentially be bracing for heavy winds and rain on this too. So AJC.com is going to be a great way to keep up with all of that as we kind of go through this. Also, continue to follow the story of Johnny Isak's retirement from the Senate. How about 2020 presidential election, 2 Senate elections in the state of Georgia? That's going to be a really wild thing to follow there as well. And also plenty more stuff as you head towards Sunday. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. Also, huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews cool down possible as well. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. They play all the positions for us here at Dog Nation. Can play all those for you. Make sure you get that $99 Smiley tune-up. Story after story, R.S. Andrews has been delivering smiles. And the question they ask is, how can they make you smile today? And certainly they will when you check them out at rsandrews.com. You'll have a great day. Thanks for being with us. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to seeing you back here again on Monday.